Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Freed. I'm the John M. Nickerson Professor of Political Science at the University of Maine. And I'd like to thank Cindy Eisenhower and the others on the committee for organizing this panel and for the other panel in this fall series. Clearly, we all know that issues of race are very important in American politics and elsewhere. My focus is, in my own research, is on public opinion, on the development and cultivation of distrust in America. I have a forthcoming book on that, and race is a part of that entire trend and dynamic. I also teach a course on race in American politics that will be offered next semester for undergraduate seniors in the political science department. In any case, today my focus is on a particular aspect of public policy. And bear with me for just a second as I put up my PowerPoint. All right. My title for today is Affirmative Action for White People. And this may seem like a rather odd sort of title. After all, when we think of affirmative action, we tend to think of it in terms of policies that benefit people who are not white, people of color. And often, if we know anything about it, we know that these policies were developed at a time when the main focus was on African Americans, on Black people. And it has a particular set of understandings, the term affirmative action, because of that. Now, when we think of what we typically call affirmative action, it's related to the understanding that you have a group of people who have been held back in various ways and therefore have not been able to compete in the same way as the white people in the community. And therefore, the idea is to be racially conscious, to take account of race in various ways so that you can level the playing field, you can provide equal opportunity, and you can really look at the pools of people within particular institutions. So for example, look at individuals who are applying to a particular program, applying for a job, and try to equalize it. Well, that understanding comes from the initial use of the term by Lyndon Johnson, who in 1965, as president, goes to Howard University and gives a speech essentially introducing affirmative action policies. And you see that same underlying understanding there, where he talks about people who are hobbled by chains, saying that you simply can't take those individuals, liberate them, bring them up to the starting line of a race, and then say you're free to compete with the other and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Now, affirmative action policies received a good deal of backlash in American politics and also somewhat through some legal decisions. And they were sometimes characterized as reverse discrimination. And often the understandings that go with that are that other policies are simply racially neutral. Now, in my talk today, I make the argument, drawing from lots of others' research, that racially neutral policies, things that we see as racially neutral, often aren't. And in understanding this, we have to take account of policy design, how they're set up, how they can be accessed, who benefits specifically from particular policies, and then looking at who designed the policy, and to understand why they were designed that way and what their impact was, looking at the broader influence of political context and political timing. And the terminology that I'm using, talking about affirmative action as being white, comes from Ira Katznelson, a political scientist at Columbia University, who wrote this superb book and they're about racial inequality in 20th century America and the impact of particular policies and how they, in fact, disproportionately helped white people. Okay, I have several examples to give you today, and two of them are very popular policies. Actually, they're all quite popular policies, but two of them are ones that were developed under the Roosevelt administration. So the first is Social Security. Now, Social Security, from its very creation until today, remains an incredibly popular policy. And when Roosevelt signed Social Security into law in August 1935, he said, "We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life, but we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen against the loss of a job and against poverty-ridden old age." Now, while this policy was rightly lauded and judged as transformational, it left out particular segments of the population. And this slide shows, actually, these are both part of the very same poster that was put up various places, post office, a number of other places, after the passage of Social Security, describing what it was. And if you look over on the right to the part that says who is eligible, you may find some surprises there, perhaps not, depending on how much you know about this already. But some of the exceptions here are agriculture and domestic service. Now, who were those people at the time? Well, often they were people of color, particularly African Americans. And so the policy of Social Security, which had such a big impact and had such a big influence, originally left out those groups. It's since been expanded, but it did not include those particular groups. Now, why did that happen? Well, this was at the behest of Southern members of Congress who did not want to include them in it and wanted to racially discriminate. And the South was in a very key part of Roosevelt's coalition, often known as the New Deal coalition. The South provided a lot of votes to Roosevelt. They provided a lot of legislators who would enable the passage of a lot of the key legislation, and so they were really important. And they often, some of the prime committee memberships in Congress were held by Southerners. So they had a big impact, and they were able to do this. Now, another policy that was very important is also a Roosevelt era policy. Almost 10 years later, the GI Bill, which was meant to benefit the servicemen returning from World War II. Now, the war doesn't end until 1945, but the GI Bill is passed in 1944, and it's meant to help the members of the military who are coming back and returning to civilian life and hoping to create some economic growth. And clearly it did. Often the GI Bill is characterized in very positive ways as creating the American middle class, but it too had a disproportionate impact and can be seen as fitting under this general category of affirmative action for whites. Well, how could that be? Well, some of the key elements of it, first of all, were an educational benefit, which could be used either for higher education or for apprenticeships or vocational training. And then also a mortgage or housing benefit, these very, very low interest loans to buy mortgages. And there were a lot of African Americans in the military, yet they did not benefit as much. Well, the key again is policy design. And the fellow here over on the left is John Rankin. He was a House member from Mississippi, and he was the head of the House Veterans Committee. And he was a frank white supremacist and supporter of segregation. And in designing the bill, there were various pressures on the Roosevelt administration. Veterans groups typically wanted to have as generous a benefit as possible. And then there were others who wanted things that were more restrictive in it. The real contribution as such of Rankin was his emphasis on giving power to the states, enabling the states to make their own rules. and not the federal government. And so states and also private actors acted in racially discriminatory ways. States often, particularly in the South, had segregated facilities, educational facilities. And so if you were a Black person who was coming back, who had been in the military, you could not go to the white colleges. You might have fewer options available to you when it came to education as a result of that, or poorer facilities. Also, when it came to the vocational training, the apprenticeships, it was up to individuals whether to take you as an apprentice, and they could discriminate on the basis of race. When it came to housing, it was up to the banks who they wanted to loan to, and often there was racial discrimination in their lending. And they also practiced redlining, which limited what neighborhoods would receive the loans. And this has a big impact. The combination of these policies have a big impact on the development of wealth for various families. And you get these very big racial disparities in family wealth, because really people's major asset often as a family is their home. And Black people aren't able to build up that same equity. And of course, people's education or vocational training is also important for their ability to earn income and save money and build wealth for themselves. So the impact is tremendous. Now, one thing that changes a lot of what happens and then leads to policies that actually, when coupled with other kinds of changes, have more of a racially neutral impact or some mitigation of racial disparities, is the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So the Civil Rights Act is passed in 1964 and followed by the Voting Rights Act in 1965. The picture on the left here is Lyndon Johnson at the bill signing ceremony, and he is handing one of the pens that he's using for signing the legislation to Martin Luther King. So Johnson, who had been more on the side of racial segregation and not a lot of civil rights, does adopt those kinds of policies after he becomes president. He also is known for some important policies in healthcare, Medicare and Medicaid, Medicare, which is designed for elderly people, and Medicaid for low-income people, which is passed in 1965. Now, the combination of those policies is very important. There was no Civil Rights Act when Social Security was passed. There was no Civil Rights Act when the GI Bill was passed. But because the Civil Rights Act existed before Medicare and Medicaid was passed, the result was that when it came to health facilities that were segregated, and you see there on the right a sign from a hospital that segregated by race. But in any case, when this was passed, it forced the desegregation of medical facilities. The internal implementation within the federal government and the rules that were passed caused medical facilities to be desegregated. So in this case, timing and context really made a difference. What was the most important elements of that? Well, really, it was the broader shifts in American politics. This is a big subject, too big for me to discuss today. But if you can just get a sense of it by looking at these two electoral college maps. In 1944, the blue parts, the Democratic parts, include the South. So the South was clearly a part of the Democratic coalition. The red parts, the Republican parts, include parts of New England and the Midwest. Well, by 1964, there had been a really wholesale remaking of the Electoral College map. At this point, Goldwater, who's conservative, who was an opponent of Medicare, Medicaid, and the Civil Rights Act, takes just a small number of states, while Johnson wins overwhelmingly. He takes Arizona, his home state, but more importantly, he's starting to pick up the swath across the South. So at this point, politics had shifted to some extent. and therefore so did public policy. And so we see that these policies that I've discussed, these three policies that I've discussed, two of them, which are so important and so central to wealth and family incomes, did not really help Black people very much. They appeared to be neutral, but really were not. They really were, in fact, affirmative action for white people. And thank you very much.
All right. And again, thank you very much.